We think of pirates as bloodthirsty anarchists, but the reality is far more surprising. These outlaws created one of the most progressive democratic systems in history, a system where everyone had a voice and a right to a share. And then, they devised ingenious ways to hack it. Picture a sun-drenched deck, a treasure chest lying open. While the crew celebrates, the captain discreetly pockets a handful of the finest gems. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was one of three primary methods of deception woven into the very fabric of pirate culture. In the code of the famous pirate Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, Article 6 stated, "Every man has a vote in affairs of moment." This isn't a myth, it's a documented fact of direct democracy on the high seas. To understand why pirates clung so fiercely to their code, you have to see what they were fleeing from. The Royal Navy and merchant ships were floating prisons. They were defined by the captain's tyranny, meager pay, and brutal corporal punishment for the slightest infraction. A sailor in the Royal Navy earned 19 shillings a month, with payments often delayed for years. He could be forcibly pressed into service. A single mistake could earn him a lashing from the cat o' nine tails. Piracy wasn't just a rebellion, it was an escape. Amidst this chaos, each ship drafted its own document, the Articles of Agreement. This was their constitution, an oath each man swore upon a Bible or crossed pistols. No one was allowed on board without signing it. These articles were like the charter of a radical startup, written by the employees themselves, not their boss. By signing, you didn't just get a job, you became a co-owner of a high-risk venture, where your signature marked the point of no return and branded you a criminal for life. In the next few minutes, we'll break down the three main principles of this code, witness the sacred ritual of dividing the plunder, and most importantly, I'll show you the three sophisticated ways pirates cheated each other, at the risk of being thrown overboard. The first principle will surprise you. The penalty for cheating was spelled out in the code just as clearly as the shares of treasure. And it wasn't always as simple as being marooned on a deserted island. There were far more brutal options that made a man think twice before hiding a single coin. At the heart of the pirate code was a principle that sounds utopian today: 1 share per man. Captain, cook, common sailor, everyone received 1 basic share of all plunder. This was revolutionary. On the merchant ships they fled, a captain could take 50% or more. A pirate ship was essentially a cooperative where all workers were shareholders. Compare that to a modern corporation, where a CEO, by some estimates, earns 3-4 times more than the average employee. Pirates would have laughed such a leader off the ship and then hoisted him from the yardarm. But this equality wasn't about leveling everyone down. Key specialists received a bonus. The carpenter, on whom the ship's life depended, received 1 1/4 shares. The surgeon, who patched up their wounds, got 1 1/2. And the quartermaster, an elected officer who protected the crew's interests from the captain himself, received 2 shares, the same as the captain. This wasn't a hierarchy of power, but a meritocracy of mayhem. Your share depended not on your rank, but on your actual value to their survival. And that's not all. Pirates created the world's first system of workers' compensation. Lose your right arm in battle, you get 600 pieces of 8. Your left arm, 500. An eye, 100. This money was paid out from the common plunder before the main division. This was pure pragmatism. Men fought more fiercely knowing they would be cared for if maimed. This system emerged a century before most nations even considered something similar. 600 Spanish pieces of 8 was a fortune, equivalent to a decade's wages for an honest sailor. Think about it for a second. Does your current job offer compensation spelled out with such precision? Millions of freelancers and delivery drivers in the modern gig economy have neither health insurance nor paid sick leave. A pirate code from the early 18th century offered better working conditions than some 21st century tech platforms. And then there was the most democratic principle of all. The captain was an absolute dictator only during battle or a chase. In all other matters, his decision could be overturned by a simple crew vote, and this wasn't an empty rule. The formidable Captain Charles Vane was voted out of command for cowardice. His place was taken by John Calico Jack Rackham. The captain wasn't a king, He was an elected crisis manager who could be fired at any moment. But all this democracy was put to the test at one single moment, the division of the plunder. Imagine a quiet cove somewhere in the Caribbean, a place pirates called a careenage, where they would clean their ships' hulls. The vessel is at anchor. The entire crew is on deck. No rum. This was an ironclad rule. Article 3 of Roberts's Code forbade gambling for money. Everyone understood that money and alcohol were an explosive mix. At the center stands not the captain, but the quartermaster. In one hand he holds a pistol, in the pit. Other, a set of scales. He pours the treasure onto a massive piece of sailcloth. In the ensuing silence, the only sound is the clinking of coins. Economist Peter Leeson compared this system to a modern constitutional monarchy. The captain is the king, the nation's leader in wartime. But the quartermaster is the prime minister. He controls the treasury and ensures the law is followed. He was a union leader, chief financial officer, and supreme judge all rolled into one. His primary duty was to make sure the captain didn't steal a single coin. Look at this through the eyes of a cabin boy at his first division of plunder. He holds his breath, his gaze fixed on the quartermaster's hands as he counts the doubloons. Suddenly, he sees it. A single gold coin rolls off the sail and falls through a crack in the deck boards. What should he do? Say nothing? Or risk speaking up and being accused of slander? A false accusation of theft was punished just as severely as theft itself. You had to be absolutely certain before opening your mouth. The mechanics of the process were perfected. All plunder was divided into equal piles, one for each share. The carpenter would get his share and a quarter, the surgeon his share and a half. Then they would roll dice to determine the order of choosing. Starting with the winner, each man would step forward and take his pile. It was like a schoolyard draft where captains pick players one by one. The very act of personal choice created a powerful psychological sense of fairness. You chose your own fate. The system seems flawless. Everyone watches everyone else. The crew watches the quartermaster. The quartermaster watches the captain. So how did they manage to steal from each other, right here, in plain sight? The answer lies in the oath they swore. Alexander Exquemelin, in his book The Buccaneers of America, wrote that every man took a solemn vow not to conceal even a cent. The very existence of such an oath proves the temptation was immense, and the first method of cheating was the most brazen and the most effective. Remember our captain pocketing the gems? That is the first method, the captain's privilege. Upon capturing an enemy ship, he was the first to storm the cabin. By an unwritten rule, he could take one or two personal trophies before the general division, navigational instruments, a fine weapon, or a pouch of the best stones. Technically, it wasn't theft. It was a gray area in the code, the pirate equivalent of a top executive's expense account. It was from this ambiguity between common plunder and a personal prize that the legends of Captain Kidd's buried treasure grew. On a scale of audacity, this method scores a 6 out of 10, because it was done almost openly. But the second method was far more subtle, and its perpetrator was the chief guarantor of honesty, the quartermaster. He was responsible for provisions. He could slightly inflate the cost of rum or gunpowder purchased from the common funds before the division. Or even more cunningly, when weighing a gold ingot, he could miscalculate its weight slightly, setting aside the surplus for himself. This technique is called salami slicing, cutting off slices so thin that no one notices anything is missing. The quartermaster was like a dishonest bartender who underpours every cocktail. An individual customer won't notice, but by the end of the shift, the bartender has a full bottle of liquor on the side. This is a 9 out of 10. He was undermining the very essence of trust. But the most ingenious deception deserves an 11 out of 10 because it was disguised as justice itself. This wasn't just theft. It was an attempt to build a shadow hierarchy on a ship where everyone was formally equal. During a storm or a boarding, some of the plunder might accidentally fall overboard. The code allowed for this, writing off such losses, but a cunning group, say, the captain and his bosun, could arrange it beforehand. They would drop a small but very valuable pouch overboard with a thin line attached, or in a display of supreme skill they would take precise coordinates by the stars to return for it later. This was the pirate equivalent of laundering money through offshore accounts. The ocean was their offshore zone. They risked everything, and they did it because a pirate's life was short, an average of 2 to 3 years before death or capture. This created a get what you can while you can mentality. Even in the most equitable system, human nature and fear of the future took over. In psychology, this is called temporal discounting, the tendency to prefer a smaller reward now over a larger one later. As historian Peter Leeson confirms, for a pirate, later might never come. Cheating the system was an art, but what happened if you were caught? The punishment was spelled out in the code as clearly as the shares, and it was far worse than simply losing your treasure. It was called marooning. The term comes from the Spanish word cimarrón, meaning wild or feral, which originally referred to escaped slaves hiding in the mountains. Pirates, themselves fugitives, ironically used this word for their ultimate punishment, exile from society. The process of this exile was swift and brutal. The trial, a drumhead court-martial, took place right on deck. There were no lawyers, no appeals. The quartermaster, yesterday's guarantor of honesty, became today's prosecutor. The jury was the entire crew. Anyone could speak. And then came the vote. It was direct democracy, like an internet forum where the community decides a user's fate. Only instead of a ban, the sentence was delivered with a cutlass. For minor offenses like hiding a single coin, you were simply stripped of your share and flogged. It was humiliating, but it was a chance to reform. For crimes against the crew's honor, the punishment was more severe. You could be keel-hauled, dragged on a rope under the entire length of the ship's hull, which was covered in sharp barnacles. Few survived. This wasn't just punishment, it was the public erasure of your identity. But for serious theft from a shipmate, the ultimate penalty followed. You were put ashore on a speck of land in the middle of the ocean. You were given only a bottle of water, a little gunpowder, and a pistol loaded with a single bullet. This was not a quick execution. It was a slow torture of loneliness and despair. The bullet wasn't a weapon. It was a final act of mercy, a choice between a swift end and a slow agony from thirst. This was the fate that befell the Scottish sailor Alexander Selkirk, who spent 4 years on an island and whose story inspired the novel Robinson Crusoe. Put yourself in the crew's shoes. Your shipmate has stolen your share. Your vote decides his fate. In that moment, the line between justice and vengeance blurs. A decision made by the majority is not always a just one. Is this an example of democracy or mob rule? Ochlocracy? Killing another pirate or deserting in battle was punished swiftly with a bullet or a noose, but theft was considered a betrayal of the family, which is why the punishment was so agonizing. A pirate ship was a joint stock company. Murdering another shareholder was a criminal offense, but stealing from the common treasury was fraud that undermined the entire business. It was a betrayal not just of a person, but of the entire corporation, and it was punished like treason. So what was the pirate code? A historical anecdote or an extreme social experiment? It proves that even in desperate circumstances, people strive for justice, but it also shows that any perfect system is vulnerable. Economist Peter Leeson calls pirates not savages, but rational businessmen. Their code, their Jolly Roger flag, their brutality, all were effective tools for conducting business in a lawless environment. Piracy was not chaos, it was an alternative, brutal order. From this order, we can draw 3 lessons for any modern office. First, transparency is a weapon against chaos. The pirates wrote down their rules and divided their plunder in front of everyone. Today, this is called radical transparency. Second, reward responsibility, not status. The bonuses for the carpenter and surgeon were payment for their contribution, not their title. This is the pure principle of pay for performance. And third, balance of power. The quartermaster, as an independent controller, counterbalanced the captain, a classic system of checks and balances, like that between a CEO and a COO. Ultimately, the entire history of the pirate code is a story of a struggle between 2 forces. So which proved stronger on their decks? The drive for justice or innate human greed? Write just one word in the comments: code or greed. Let's see which one wins. The pirate ship was a floating laboratory of human nature, and we are still debating the results of this extreme experiment today. Your vote in the comments is one more entry in that lab journal.